Kathy, you ready for us to start?
Yeah, I'm fine.
All right. Were we good?
Yes.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. As you may have noticed, I'm not Cindy King. She can't make it today, so you'll have to bear with me while we jump through this. Kathy, have you taken roll call?
Yes.
Perfect. First up on the agenda is public comment. And I will go ahead and open it up at this point for any public comment.
If anybody raise your hand, it's a *9 if you're on a phone, which nobody is. Otherwise, raise your hand for any public comment. And nobody has raised their hand.
We're clear to proceed.
Clear to proceed. All right. Next up is the approval for the March minutes. Has everybody on the committee had time to review these minutes, and are there any questions?
You need a motion?
And if there are no questions or comments, yes, we will need a motion.
Okay, I'll move to approve the minutes.
A second.
Okay, so we'll go up for a vote, and I will, for this one, I think we could probably just, everybody hold up their hand. Will that work? All those in favor? All right, I'm gonna go through this and kind of see. You'll have to bear with me a little bit. Matt Martino's and I, Kathy Austin's and I. It looks like actually I still have some people that I can't see. Joanna's and I, Heather's and I.
I think it's
Keith is an aye.
looking angelic
there he is.
back there.
Yep,
but
Keith is and I. I'm gonna change my view.
And Allison's an aye also.
Allison's and I, there we go. Looks like Ian's loading in. All those opposed? Okay. Next up, Lynn, looks like we have some SDC exemption requests.
We do. I am going to share my screen. Some of you may have, let's see. Let's see if this works. Can you all see my screen right now, the SDC exemption? Okay, so I apologize. There was some last minute back and forth internally, making sure that we had the numbers correct on this one. So I figured it would be easier to just share my screen and make sure that you all had the appropriate info out in front of you. So 2 SDC exemptions today for your consideration. The first one is not Veterans Village, my goodness. It is St. Vincent's Place, which is comparable to Veterans Village in that it was approved through House Bill 4212. That was the emergency legislation that came through over the summer and allowed for shelters to site basically without regard to the development code. So they are in the process of working through building permits right now. SDCs are required for any development in Bend. This one, some of you may have noticed that the math wasn't as obvious as it may have been. In fact, some of us internally put bets on whether committee members would make sure that the math was appropriate. And so I appreciate you all for that. So there are 11 units listed on this sheet. One is an existing home that is on the property right now. And so there is a partial or full SDC credit for that home, but I did want to account for that home that already exists. There will be 10 new shelters that will be potentially even exactly the same as Veterans Village. They're working with the same folks. So individual, these ones will not have water or sewer piped to them. That will all be in a community building, also on site. So a little bit different. And what we put together here is the max potential that you all would be exempting. So there may be more of a credit that'll come through from that existing single family home, but we wanted to give you kind of worst case scenario as we work through it. That is because this is such an unusual type of development, that one's going to be continually worked on as we go through the building permit process, kind of make sure that all of our bases are covered with that. So hopefully y'all can read this, but wanted to make sure that you had the correct numbers. You guys do qualify, this development does qualify for the SCC exemption. St. Vincent de Paul does own these lots and is willing to undertake a deed restriction in the form of a covenant or something else. And they have been abiding by affordability requirements already. We've funded, I think there are 10 units on site right now that had some lead remediation a while back that was funded through the City of Bend and are used as rental units right now. So they're very familiar with our processes and rules. And this was just a great opportunity for them. So that's the first one. Any questions? I can't see everybody, so hopefully somebody can let me know if there are questions.
I don't see any hands up.
So Lynn, you want us to make a motion in two separate motions, one for ours, the cities, and one for the Parks Department?
Correct. So what we first should do, and I always forget this, I apologize, is conflict of interest disclosure. And in this case, let's do it for both St. Vincent de Paul as well as for Watercress Way, which is a habitat development. So let's do conflict of interest declarations. And then after that, I will tell you that this first motion is because you all kind of hold the final decision-making for the City of Bend with SDC exemptions. This doesn't go to council. However, you are recommending to the Bend Park and Recreation District that these are exempted. So you don't have that full decision in your hands, if that makes sense. So that's why there's two motions. And Allison, is that?
Quick question, which habitat development is this in Bend?
Correct.
the
Yeah.
conflict
So the
of interest. Okay,
second
just checking.
one, which I'll go through with you in a moment, I figured it would just be easier to break them up and just do St. Vincent's first, and then I'll scroll down so you can see the habitat one, and I'll give you the run through of that after we do St. Vincent's. Is that okay?
I just needed
Okay.
to know for conflict of interest.
Got it. Oh,
Thank
got it.
you.
Got it. So yes, this one is on, the addressing is actually on 18th, but they are calling it Watercress Way because that is the street that access will be taken from.
Thank you.
Okay, so we could probably just go right through the conflicts of interest first. And I'm bringing up a better view on my screen so I can kind of see who's going. Allison, we'll just start with you since you're the first one on my screen. Do you have any potential or real?
I do not have any conflicts. Thank you.
Kathy, next up.
Yeah, no conflicts for me.
Heather,
No conflicts.
Joanna,
I have no conflicts.
Keith,
No conflicts.
Ian,
No conflict, thank you.
Priscilla.
No conflicts. Thank you.
All right, I have no conflicts. And am I forgetting anybody? Let me see here. I think I got them all. Okay, so thank you, Lynn, for talking about the St. Vincent Place request. Does anybody have a motion or any questions that they'd like to present?
I'd be happy to make a motion. Okay, I move to exempt St. Vincent Place from pending City of Bend system development charges of $76,838.60 and to authorize staff to take all actions necessary to complete such exemptions, including signing loan agreements and related documents without further approval. If exemptions are not exercised before any expected increase, the increase will be added to the total exemption. I think I read that one first and then you'll see if there's a second and then I go to the next one.
Yeah.
I'll second.
Ian seconding, okay.
All right, Ian seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Can you do it by names,
Aye.
please?
Yeah, let's do it by name. So Ian, go ahead.
Aye.
Kathy,
Aye.
jumped up a little bit. Joanna,
Aye.
Heather,
Aye.
Keith,
Aye.
Allison, we'll do it one more time.
Aye.
Priscilla,
Aye.
and Matt is an aye as well.
So I need the screen to see the
Yep.
next one.
Sorry, I was thinking that might have helped, but I don't know if it actually did. All right.
No,
can
it
you see
did. I think it did.
Okay.
Okay, and then I move to recommend the Bend Park and Recreation District execute director or designee exempt St. Vincent Place from pending Bend Park and Recreation District system development charges of $59,320. If exemptions are not exercised before any expected increase, the increase will be added to the total exemption. Is there a second?
Second.
Who
Who
seconded?
seconded?
Oh, Ian's raising his hand.
Ian seconds.
All right, and we'll go through this one again as well, person by person. Joanna,
Aye.
Kathy,
Aye.
Heather,
Aye.
Keith,
Aye.
Allison,
Aye.
Ian,
Aye.
and Priscilla.
Aye.
And Matt is an aye.
Okay, so I am sharing, hopefully y'all can see the second part of this presentation, which is Watercress Way. So this is a Habitat for Humanity development. The city has funded the purchase in part of this land a while back, and they are developing 8 townhomes. The good news is there's some really great transportation improvements that are being done by somebody else in the nearby area. So this development is getting even more connected to the grid and other services, et cetera. These ones definitely meet the requirements for the SDC exemption and are willing to undertake a deed restriction of a minimum of 30 years. So pretty straightforward, standard affordable development, townhome development. Any questions?
Looking to see if anybody has their hand raised, and I don't see any. Oh, Kathy, go ahead.
Just a curious about where we are on the number of park exemptions. Are we bumping up to the number that they're allowing for us?
Great question, and thank you for that, because I didn't mention that with the last one, which I should have. So shelters are exempt from that unit cap for Bend Park and Recreation District. So the St. Vincent's Place will not count towards that unit cap. I believe we had approximately 20 left before we kick into that new resolution that gave us, 150 more over the next 2 years. So this is, and I'll double check that. If I'm incorrect, I will send you all an email with the actual number towards the cap, but this would still be, this habitat development would still be under the current resolution, not sort of the next version, which puts some different rules into place. So, yeah.
And my memory is that the Parks Department for the future has we can't use it all up in 1 year or even one
Correct.
time frame. They have it sort of, was it per year or even more restricted?
Yes. So, so what they chose to do, and I don't have it in front of me, so I'm going off memory and can follow up at a future meeting if y'all want. I think we probably should do that before we do any more SDC exemptions going forward, is that they've created a new unit cap for us, adding 150 additional units over the next 2 years. So again, their resolution will expire at the same time as the city's ordinance allowing for SDC exemptions as well, which is end of 2022. So this group and council will be working on what that looks like past the 2022 timeline that's coming. And the way they've broken it down is in the next 150, there is up to 75 per year that can be exercised. But they've carved out shelters and are allowing those to not count towards the cap. They've also carved out certain mixed use development up to 5 units in a mixed income development. Up to 5 units can be exempted, also not counting towards the cap. However, I think there was some hesitation because the Wish Camper development came through and kind of, took all the exemptions kind of in Parks' mind. And so what they wanted to do was to create some limitations on the total number of units to have the process be a little more measured throughout the 2 years so that we didn't burn through them all again right away and come right back for more. So I believe that the breakdown is 54 units and under. You can have, assuming the cap is still in place and there's still units left to be exempted under that cap, you can have all 54 units in your development exempted. However, if you have 55 or more units in your development, only 50% of those can be exempted, even if there's the cap remaining. So again, they kind of wanted to, I think, try to put in some measures to make sure that they didn't all go away really quickly. And beyond that, I'd probably have to bring park staff in or board to talk about sort of what their decision-making reasoning was. But we do, I think, have the wonderful carve out for shelters and for mixed income developments, small mixed income developments.
Thank you, Lynn. I'm sorry to put you on the spot there. It's just, I think we should keep it in mind as we move forward. Thank
It would
you.
be great if we can get the final language around that, because I've been unclear about it as well.
Definitely.
Yeah, and as we move through more and more, it's good to know if we're going to approach that cap or not. And yeah, it's good. Anybody want to go forward with a motion?
I thought I'd let somebody else make a motion this time. If
We're on
nobody,
the Ben Park and Rec SDC.
oh, good.
Right now. Is that right?
So I think we have not yet done watercress from either city or park.
Okay.
Correct. So
Okay,
we can
great.
start with the first one.
I move to exempt Habitat's Watercress Way from pending City of Bend system development charges of $73,272 and to authorize staff to take all actions necessary to complete such exemptions, including signing loan agreements and related documents without further approval. If exemptions are not exercised before any expected increase, the increase will be added to the total exemption.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right, Keith, thank you. All right, we'll go through. We'll see if we have any ayes. All those in favor, Priscilla?
Aye.
Ian?
Aye.
Allison?
Aye.
Keith?
Aye.
Heather?
Aye.
Kathy?
Aye.
Joanna?
Aye.
And Matt is an aye as well. All right. Now the next section. Does anybody want to take that one on?
I can make a motion there. I move to recommend the Bend Park and Recreation District Executive Director or designee exempt Habitat's Watercress Way from pending Bend Park and Recreation District system development charges of $46,752. If exemptions are not exercised before any expected increase, the increase will be added to the total exemption.
Ian, you're raising your hand.
Concur.
All right, so Ian will second. All those in favor, Joanna?
Aye.
Kathy?
Aye.
Heather?
Aye.
Keith?
Aye.
Allison?
Aye.
Ian?
Aye.
Priscilla? We raised your hand as an aye, and Matt's an aye. All right, we're moving along, guys. Nice work. Okay, cross that one off. I think next up is the habitat change of use, and I believe we have Melissa joining us as well. Rachel, you want to help out on that one?
Sure. So Habitat has a request regarding some affordable housing funding that we awarded them. This was a change of use request about a year ago, a little over a year ago. And we went ahead with that change of use and bought 3 pieces of or helped them acquire 3 pieces of property for a homeownership development. However, because of some circumstances, they have to change their AMI request, which would result in city staff needing to amend the trust deed that was recorded to reflect these AMI changes. And so that would come with a filing fee cost that we would ask Habitat to pay. But Melissa is here to kind of explain why those AMI changes need to be made and to kind of give you an update of what's going on. Take it away, Melissa.
So much. Hi, everybody. Do I have permission to share my screen? I think I do.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. So as Rachel mentioned, I had the honor of coming to talk to you back last year. And I'm here to talk to you today about why we are asking for this change and to give you some background information. So as Rachel mentioned, we're requesting an AMI adjustment for 3 properties. And I'm just going to breeze through this because Rachel opened it very clearly for us. So we were awarded $364,000 back in 2019 for infrastructure. At the time, we wrote our grant for an 80% AMI max because that was our common practice. When I approached you back in last year, we asked for a change because this is a land lease and we figured out just with our internal processes that it just wasn't feasible to use this kind of funding with our land lease models. So we approached you for a change of use and thank you so much. You approved it. We used $260,000 to purchase 3 lots and we gave back $164,000. This is not a recent picture, but it's just so beautiful that I wanted to show you. This is the Northwest Cottages site. We used $60,000 to purchase lot number 10. We used $95,000 to purchase this lot here at Indigo Lane and $105,000 to purchase this lot on Logan Avenue. Why are we requesting a change? I'm telling you a story about a woman that we will call Susan. She's a Habitat family, and because of her background, we can't share her real name or real picture. But I'll tell you that she came to us after a 20-year abusive relationship. She suffered some setbacks, has since completed our program, but she's now facing disqualification. And let me explain why. 2018, she came to our program at 57% AMI. And that was a really safe AMI to start with for us. However, in 2019, her household size changed. And when one of her children grew up and became an adult, so her AMI was adjusted due to family size. She went up to 64%. 2019, she had an accident that was not her fault. As a result, she had missed work and had to accrue some debt to be able to survive. However, in 2019, she had a raise, went up to 70% AMI, had another setback though in 2020 when her last child moved out. She decided to move into a small space. That's not an ideal space for her to live in because she wanted to pay off debt. So thankfully this year she got another raise, but that put her at 81% AMI. So what are her options? After 3 years in our program, as I mentioned, she's at 81% AMI. And she can't live in any of our Lyft properties because Lyft has that cap, a hard stop at 80% AMI. And just so you know, 93% essentially of our next 40 homes are Lyft properties. So our first option that we presented to her is wait, let us go back to AHAC and ask for an extension to 100% AMI. Those 3 properties that we purchased are not Lyft properties. That's the Logan, the Indigo, and the Cottages. Her mortgage will be based on her income. We don't know the number yet, but it's likely to be less than $250,000. That's important, and I'll tell you why in just a second. The other option is we will have to disqualify her if we're not granted that extension. I looked on April 1st and there were no homes for sale at what she can afford of less than 250,000. And we all saw the news this week with the median price at 650,000-ish. There's no homes for her. So that means she has an unsavable future. If we disqualify her, it is very unlikely that that financial freedom that she acquired will be sustained. So with that in mind, Habitat, we would like to let you know of some other contributing factors, and just to give you a snapshot of the reality of the housing market for us right now. So part of the challenge for us is we are ramping up the number of homes that we're building per year. That's a wonderful thing. We hear every day the need for more and more and more affordable housing. And with each ramp up, that is more work and more finances that we have to raise. I'll tell you, between when I made this presentation and when I gave it to Rachel, these numbers have already changed. Recent news articles showed that the cost of lumber has gone up 500% in the last year, and steel has gone up 200%. So even though this is saying $130 per square foot for 2021 construction, as of this month, that is no longer accurate. That has already gone up. Likewise, the subsidy per house of what I get to fundraise along with Robin, we're estimating 2021. When I put this together, it was about 125,000. I know now that that is not an accurate number any longer. It has gone up with the new stats about lumber and steel. Just as an example, one house, this house is 385,000. At 50% AMI, you can see all these different ways that we stack our subsidy. So we have different kinds of funding here from the city, OHCS funding, SDC exemptions. Our subsidy, that Habitat that I get to fundraise for 50% AMI is about 136,000. That same house for someone at 65% AMI, our subsidy goes down to 102,000. And at 80% AMI, 48,000. So it is, our heart of hearts wants to help the lower AMIs, but that is becoming increasingly difficult for us with the reality of the cost of construction. So things that we want you to know: the need for affordable home ownership is undeniable. So we're working as hard as we can to increase our number of homes. And I know that is, I've been watching and attending these meetings for almost 2 years now, and I know that's your heart too. But with the increased construction costs, our subsidy is increasing dramatically. So it's really hard to serve those lower AMIs. So as I mentioned earlier, for us to control how much subsidy we have, we can't accept those CDBG and Affordable Housing Fund repayable loans for our LIFT project. So it's creating a greater burden. And because we're already limited to 80% AMI by LIFT, we need these properties to serve our families that we are at risk of disqualifying. And of course, we didn't know then what we know now. And so when we wrote it at 80% AMI, I appreciate the effort that it will take you and the city of Bend to adjust this for us. We are sorry, we just didn't know then what we know now. And so we're asking for an adjustment. We also want you to know we're so thankful. Again, I hear your heart, and the rental units really help reach the council goals for the number of units. They solve that immediate need, but they also prolong the situation that our clients are in. So we know homeownership is life-changing. We thank you for your support, and I ask that you continue to support our work, especially as it just becomes more challenging. And just one little bloop on an AHAC call a couple months ago, I just want to clarify about LIFT. I am honored to be Habitat's LIFT gal. And a couple months ago, it was talked about that we all understand that LIFT is a grant and a loan. I'm sorry, it's a loan. I want to clarify, we look at it as a grant because it has a clause that if you default in 20 years, it is repayable. However, if you extend the affordability period by another 20 years, it is forgiven at the end of that period. And as we have written all of our land lease documents for 99 years, we fully intend to maintain that. Therefore, in our vocab and in our understanding, it is a grant. We do not intend to have a default to pay that back. So at this point, I will pause and answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Melissa. And I know that none of us planned for what's been going on the last few months,
Right.
Especially pertaining to building costs and uncertainty. Are there any questions? Kathy, I saw you raise your hand.
Yeah, I apologize, more comment. I just want to thank Melissa for that presentation because it was extremely helpful to understand the situation. And I've always been concerned about that middle group not being addressed. 80 and below gets the subsidies and the rich get to buy something and nothing's there for the people in between. And I came from a community where we really worked, we included the 80 to 120 as part of our affordable process. And so I am very supportive of what you're asking for. And I just want to mention went down to Santa Rosa to visit family over Mother's Day and built 3 raised beds with my son. And do you know a 2x12 by 10 is now $36. I spent $400 or $450 on lumber to build 3 raised beds. So I completely viscerally understand the issue with the cost of construction right now. So anyway, but I didn't quite understand what you were asking for until you did your presentation, and that was super helpful. So thank you for doing that.
Melissa, I have a quick question. And then Keith, I saw you. Is bumping this up from 80 to 80, above 80, going to jeopardize any other funding sources, including perhaps the purchase loan on the back end?
No. So if we can go to 100% AMI, and because it's not a land lease, there aren't any other restrictions that we have.
Okay, perfect. Keith, go for it.
Matt, you stole it. It was right there. No, I love that somebody can go to 100% because everything that we do, we're stuck. The highest we can go, normally 60. If we're lucky, we can go 80, but we never can stretch to 100. So I fully support being able to do that because yeah, you're right. I mean, who can? No, I mean, it's very hard to afford our median price, and there's 250 grand shouldn't be, nothing out there in that, but it is. And so, yeah, I'd love that you could do more of these, honestly, if you can. That's my comment.
Thank you.
I tend to agree with, one person residence, 80% is what, 45,000 right now in Deschutes County. And that's barely cutting it for what the cost of living is. Ian, I see that your hand's up. Go for it.
Thank you, Chair. Quick question for staff. And I heard in that presentation a couple times, asking for a change from the city. So my question to staff is, what effort is required on the city's side, and what's the duration to get that work done to make such a change?
So we would just need to amend the deed of trust that was recorded originally at that 80% AMI. So that would be a filing fee to make that change, but it certainly can be done within the time frame that Habitat would need it to be done. And I think that's it. These homeowners would not be eligible for down payment assistance. That is just unfortunate because of CDBG requirements at that 80% AMI.
Okay. And a secondary question to that, just because sort of we are where we are in terms of resources right now, and are there other impacts on other projects that staff is working on, in terms of delays or otherwise to get this done? It sounds like an absolutely reasonable and fantastic ask. Certainly, I wasn't expecting this in the industry I work in. But in terms of city staff effort, I know that there's not a deep bench of folks working. Is this going to impact any other project timelines that staff is working on?
It shouldn't. These amendments probably won't be addressed for a couple months, but I don't think that Bend Habitat has any intention of developing these properties. They have a long list of properties to develop first that are kind of priority.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Matt.
Questions? Any other? Oh, Joanna, your hand's up. And Heather, I see you as well.
Thanks. I'm sorry I lost connection during most of your presentation, so I actually missed a lot of it. So if this is a question that you already addressed, I apologize. But I'm just wondering, if you raise the upper limits, is there any processes in place for making sure that people who are making 40,000 are still, can still access those same things, or, is that opportunity still accessible for people on the lower end?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. We have 93% of our homes in the next 4 years will be for 80% AMI and under. And so it's really, those are tied up to our LIFT, OHCS's LIFT funding that we received, and they require us to be 80% AMI or under. So it's only these three that we have right now that we could serve higher AMIs. And so the majority of what we're doing is for the lower AMIs, yes.
Thank you.
Heather, go ahead.
Thank you for the presentation. I just want to check my understanding. So if we approve the up to 100% AMI for those three properties, I understand that that's going to maintain eligibility, if you will, for folks like Susan, who you shared with us. But a comment was made about now not qualifying for down payment assistance. Can you talk about how that might impact future people who are applying for these funds, and how critical that down payment assistance might be for these particular properties? Are we sort of undermining our ability to help others? Just trying to understand kind of the trade-offs here.
Sure, that's a good question. So in my little pie graphs that I showed you, the habitat subsidy goes down with as the AMIs get larger. And you're all correct. Anyone that is 81 to 100% AMI, they won't qualify for down payment assistance through the state or through HUD funding through the city. That's okay, because they can afford, again, the way Habitat arranges the mortgages, it's based on the affordability of the home buyer. And so they can afford more of a mortgage than someone who has a lower AMI, which just means then we shuffle things around to where we still fundraise for them. We just, all the little numbers stack a little bit differently. So we would still fundraise for them, and they would not necessarily need the same down payment assistance that someone at 40% AMI would need. They still can't buy a traditional house on the market, but they just wouldn't qualify. We would fill that gap with our subsidy.
Kind of a segue question. So by accepting and authorizing this change for these three particular properties, if this one person's coming in at 81%, but the other two are coming in sub 80, are they still eligible for down payment assistance? Even though that these funds are accessible for people up to 100?
So I guess what I would like to say is that we would like the opportunity to go to 100% AMI for all three of these, but that doesn't necessarily assume that we will. We just know that with, COVID had some impacts too, where we had some folks that are requiring a longer time period to finish our program because they lost employment or they had a reduction in income. And we were worried on that end too, that people might disqualify from losing a job. So folks are in our program longer. And like Susan that I talked about, she got a raise when she would have already been in a home had COVID not happened and all the impacts. So because we have people in our program for longer, the risk of going over the top is greater, which we want them. We want them to get raises. We would never want to stifle someone's progress. So we know for sure we have one family, Susan, that is at risk for being disqualified at the end of this call if we don't get the approval to proceed. We have 2 other families that are on the edge. So we may or may not put over 80% in those other 2 properties. We just know we need some, that we have that ability to do that.
Perfect. Thank you. Anybody else?
I'll just add that the AMI numbers just came out recently from HUD and they've increased. So it's also possible that as those numbers increase, that these families could possibly stay under 80% AMI. HUD finally might have acknowledged that median income in Bend is a little higher than everywhere else.
Yeah, they bumped up by a few grand, I noticed. I don't see any other questions. Lynn or Rachel, I don't know if you can answer this. Do we need a motion for approval? Or is this something that we can all just discuss? How do we proceed?
I think it would be great to have a motion from this group. It can be informal if you all are comfortable with that. This one, I think we feel comfortable, won't need to go back to city council just because we are so close to that mark and it's all eligible. CDBG would have a different process and we wouldn't even be having this discussion. So that's sort of where we are. I think it would be great to have some form of motion, but it doesn't have to be complex.
Thank you. Anyone care to discuss more? Allison, saw you raise your hand.
Oh, well, I was going to make a motion.
Go for
it. So I would move that we take we grant Melissa's recommendation to change the use criteria and raise the AMI up to and including 100%. Is that what is being asked?
Yeah, that's my understanding.
That's it.
I would second that.
Thank you, Keith. We'll just go down the line. All those in favor, Kathy?
Aye.
Heather?
Aye.
Keith?
Aye.
Allison?
Aye.
Ian?
Aye.
Priscilla?
Aye.
I'm an aye, and I see, do we still have, yeah, I think that's everybody.
Joanna?
I think Joanna.
Oh, Joanna. Am I
Thanks.
missing?
Thank you. I think I'm going to have to abstain because I missed all of the details of the presentation because of my connectivity. So I don't feel like I can vote.
Okay. Believe motion passes. Thank you very much, Melissa. Appreciate your time today and appreciate all of your hard work that you guys do over there. Very much needed.
Wait to notify the homeowner. Thank you so much.
Welcome. Rachel, scoring criteria.
All right, so we sent out the scoring criteria evaluation and the RFP that kind of addressed those changes and the language that would change in the RFP to address that. I just want to make sure everyone has had a chance to see that. And if you haven't, I can pull it up and share it with you all. I just don't know how much sharing we need to do. So I just wanted to start the discussion. And again, if you need me to pull it up on the screen, I'm happy to do so. We just addressed some of the scoring criteria requests you all made, and we want to make sure that we've addressed them fully. And if you have any more comments or questions, we just want to get that discussion started right now.
Anybody have any talking points, questions, anything that they'd like to discuss for these? I mean, they're pretty straightforward. I don't personally have anything to chat about regarding them.
So I just have a question. Are you coming back with the revisions based on the comments you've gotten before? You're just asking if there's any additional comments, or I'm a little unclear.
So we made changes. I made changes based on the conversations we had in March, not just to the scoring criteria evaluation, but also to the loan terms, which will be our next discussion. However, if you looked at the scoring criteria evaluation form, you should be able to see those changes that were requested. you want me to bring it up? Because it sounds like you haven't had a good chance to look at it, Kathy.
You know, I was on vacation and I didn't get it, but I
Okay,
don't
I'll
want to
share.
drag everybody else through it. So yeah, I tried
it's
to
easy.
read everything.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a PDF document. The changes were made in red, it looks like.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the evaluation form. And what we did is there used to be like number 3 criteria and a number 5 criteria, but you all said that those kind of sounded the same. So we combined it into 1 criteria. So that was one change we made, essentially that organizations or agencies demonstrate staff capacity and ability to implement an effective proposed project that addresses the identified need or problem. And then we just explain that full points can go to proposals that include spending timely and from programs that have completed funding projects successfully. We took out utilizes a proven effective strategy and just put best practices to improve or solve the identified problem. And then you guys had some questions about what is one-time only infusion of funding. And so we thought we addressed it with, you know, just by saying that it's a one-time fund from or funding from the affordable housing funds. However, if you guys want to discuss what this one-time infusion means more, we could have that discussion.
That's the one that I was mostly concerned about because it gets confusing knowing that certain like groups come back every year and there's and sometimes one project carries over from one year to the next. And so it appears to be more than one time infusion of funds and yet it's worthy to get it both times. And so I just found that particular phrasing useless or not very clear. I don't know, maybe I'm the only one, but I just always kind of ignored that in the scoring criteria because I felt it was kind of not pertinent. So I don't know. It looks like Ian and Barb have something to say about that. So
yeah.
Go ahead.
Ian, you want to go ahead?
Sure, I can do that. So similarly with Kathy, my concerns with this one are I'd like to have a clear working definition. When we say a one-time infusion, whether it's from affordable housing funds or not, is that per project phase? Is that per project? I could imagine 4 different phases that an organization might come back for and ask for a one-time infusion of funds on. Across the development of a project, that would be, in fact, actually totally reasonable, and I might support every single one of them. But it stretches the credibility of the language to say one time when you have 4 one-time things to the voting public, to my mind.
Seems like a valid point. Do you have any ideas on how to potentially want to rephrase that? Maybe requires a one-time only infusion of funds from the Affordable Housing Fund for this phase, or do you want to specify for the entire project?
So to me, the intent of this has always it always seems like the intent is for the project, and then we need to define what is a project. Is the project putting in infrastructure? Is the project getting pad ready? Is the project whatever it is? The simplest way to do it seems to be to tie that language to a lot, a tax law, or however we want to define that, to say, for this piece of property, will it be one time? And that seems like it would get at the heart of the matter, if that is in fact what this committee wants to do. I think it's perfectly rational to look at a project and say, land acquisition is very different than construction, and say, if that's the intent from the committee, and it's a matter of discussion, voting perhaps, but what is this committee's intention, and how important is that? To me, it's not particularly problematic at all to say for this phase of a project, and maybe we break it down into 3 phases: land acquisition, site development, and construction. Seem like 3 reasonable phases that we could qualify a project as. But that would be my suggestion: is if it's a one-time, define it as a per tax lot, and if per project phase, we would need to have a rubric by which we say all projects need to fit into some part of a consistent project phasing that we apply equitably. Thank you.
I have some thoughts on that. Barb, do you want to jump in first? I see your hands up.
Thank you so much, Chairman Martino. I do have to go to budget deliberations after the comment I made, and now that I look at this form, I don't think it applies. But what I was thinking is one of our goals is to standardize all of the applications and those types of things throughout the city and make sure there aren't any kind of biases in those. But I see that this really isn't asking those types of questions, I don't think. But it's something to keep in mind for other kinds of applications that we are involved with, I think. So with that, I will just say thank you and good job. What are we now? 16 steps closer to 500. This time we're on the path to 500. So great work, everybody. Thanks for all you do. And I'll see you next month.
So I have a question from staff then. What was the point of this particular line? I mean, was this coming from HUD or some federal requirement, or why do we have this in here at all?
So I think that it really has to do with sort of history and best practices. There are certainly cases where folks maybe haven't done the work to make sure that the funding sources that they intend to proceed towards are available, or maybe it's the sort of full site scoping and what that's going to take. And so certainly I think the fear was that folks would come back year after year asking for a little bit more each time, rather than the full need up front so that we can get it done and move forward. The idea here, I think, is also to some degree tied to timeliness. Let's figure out what you really need, weigh it with the other folks who are in the door, and then see how we can get the most units on the ground the quickest that we can. So I think that within that, having folks kind of drag on year after year can be a challenge. That's the concern. You all have the ability to decide whether that's legitimate or not. I do want to mention, because I think we forgot to say it up front, is that this scoring sheet that you're looking at is not going to be the same for services requests under CDBG. So that we feel is a very different category, where I think this committee has chosen to fund organizations year after year because they're doing good work that's important to this group and to council. So just to be very clear, this is really for development projects is what we're looking for, not services. Does that help, Kathy?
Well, yeah, that does, but I still feel like there's a better way of asking a question that gets to the goal that you're identifying. I just, and I think what Ian was talking about phases, after a while it gets so complicated, the question. So I don't know. I still have a real problem with this particular question. I just don't think it gets at the efficiencies that you're looking for. There might be a different way of phrasing this. Has the applicant proven that the ask is commensurate with the need, or something to that effect, and if we feel like they're clearly not paying attention or haven't done the research, we can just give them a 0 on that one. But the way this is phrased, to me, still is problematic, and we can just leave it at that if nobody else agrees. I just found it, I always just basically ignored this one because it made no sense to me. And I've been on the committee 4.5 years, and I've ignored it for 4.5 years. And that doesn't seem like it's, it seems like this is the opportunity to get at something a little bit more helpful.
So I guess we could define if it's, because generally these RFPs come through for phases, right? It's either for land acquisition or for infrastructure or for something else. And so the interpretation is, is this question for the entire project or for this particular RFP? And I think if we had verbiage specifying requires one-time infusion of funds from the Affordable Housing Fund for this entire project, I think that will probably impact the overall scoring a little bit more, because if there's anticipation that requests are going to be made for each individual phase from the Affordable Housing Fund, it may warrant a lower score. Priscilla, I thought I saw your hand up. Heather, go for it.
I think we probably have more discussion on this topic, but Len, you had mentioned sort of some different interpretations or allowances here if it's a services versus development request. If that's the case, just for clarity and transparency, can we maybe add a clause, given we use the same form, that, assuming we continue with some version of this question, that clarifies that this does not apply to service requests?
Yes, absolutely.
Ian, go ahead.
Sorry, coughing. Actually, I think Heather summed up what I wanted to say. I think that makes sense. Nothing additional. Thank you.
I was just going to point out to Heather that we did clarify that in the CDBG evaluation form, which I'm sharing now.
All right. Anybody else? Okay. Rachel, do you want to move along to the loan versus grant?
Did we decide what we wanted to do with that? Whether we wanted to do phases or one time only? I wasn't clear on that.
I believe this was just an update as to where we were. Do we want to change the verbiage to specifying if it's for the entire project or for this particular phase? Anybody have any insight? I personally think it should specify for the entire project, because then we can anticipate potential requests for each phase. And in my opinion, that would warrant a lower score. I'm not swaying anybody either way, but I think that would specify or excuse me, narrow it down a little bit.
So I think you had said for this particular RFI or RFP, excuse me, yeah, this project or however it should be stated, but I would agree with you, Matt. And then it's a little bit more clear, and we can each individually decide how important that is in our overall score.
Generally, they ask for affordable housing funds once for land acquisition, and then once for something else. So I mean, yeah, of course they're going to ask for it once, but for the entire project, are they going to be coming back 6 times until its completion and spreading it out completely?
Yeah, I'd like to know if there's, I'd like to have some designation there too, so we can decide. I agree.
Priscilla, go for it.
So I actually don't have a problem with funding at multiple phases, because sometimes there can be a considerable time between the phases. We've seen that. I've seen that in my short time on the committee. And there's also a limited number of service providers. So we tend to cycle through the same service providers over and over again. I would rather see the projects get done. I think that we have the skills to evaluate at each phase whether or not in the prior phase they've used the funding adequately, and make the decision during each phase. I guess I struggle with this particular question because it seems confusing, and I'm not sure it's really been our practice in the past to not fund at multiple phases for the same agency. Anyway, that's just my input. I would like to see this. Well, I would like to know Lynn and Rachel's opinion. Do you find multiple funding at different phases problematic?
I mean, I don't really think that I appreciate your sort of discretion in allowing us to, to answer that, but I feel like that is 100% a decision that I am comfortable with this committee making. What worked for even the last committee before some of you were appointed may not work for this group, and that's okay. I don't think that there's any sort of set in stone way to do it right or wrong. I think each funding round brings new opportunities to learn and figure it out together. And so I think, this is sort of our first stab at trying to interpret what you all gave us last time for direction. And it sounds like this one still needs some work. This one criteria, that's fine. That's totally fine. We just wanted to kind of get a test from you, are we on the right track? Are we not? Where do we want to go from here? So I think if it's okay, what I would suggest is maybe just a kind of straw poll on project versus phase and how folks are feeling about that, if that's appropriate, Matt. And then Rachel and I could take that and try to massage it a little bit more and make it clearer and see where we can land. Rachel, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to what I just said.
Well, I was going to ask if there's any consensus that we might not need this criteria at all.
Yeah, I mean, really, the purpose of requesting some sort of verbiage change on this was, I think, because people were interpreting it differently. Some were going off the entire project, some were going off phase, and to get some consistency. But frankly, I mean, to Priscilla's point, I really don't think we have a problem funding multiple phases anyway. And it's generally been in our practice to do so. I mean, so I guess let's do it three ways, right? Let's do it as project, let's do it as phase, and let's just say, let's get rid of it altogether. Let's start with the third one. Who wants to get rid of it altogether? Raise your hand. Okay, I see Priscilla. I got to change my view here, I think. Here we go. Not Priscilla, excuse me. Kathy. Keith. Missing anybody? Kathy and Keith. All right, so that's 2 for eliminate.
Could I say something related to that real quick, Matt?
Sure.
So the reason I was raising my hand at that point was that we often change unit counts, site designs, and a whole bunch of things depending if we can add the property next door or potential. Things move around a lot, and so it's a very kind of fluid environment. I mean, that wouldn't really apply just to a purchase of a single family lot, but when you do larger scale developments, there's a lot of things that can change. So I just wanted to let you guys know that we change things a lot, and that's typical rather than knowing what we're going to do 3 years ahead of time and just trying to finance it. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Priscilla, I see your hands up.
All right. So I wanted to change my vote. I think I'm in favor of taking this criteria out or taking this particular question out. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay. So we'll bump that up to 3 to eliminate. All those who think that verbiage should be specified for the entire project rather than phase or rather than eliminate. Anybody raise their hand for that one? I don't see anybody.
I think so. I guess I'm unclear on that third choice. I'm thinking along the same lines, I think, as everybody here. I don't think we're committing necessarily to whether we fund something in separate phases or not. I think it would just be nice to have a criteria that allows us to get to award points based on whether or not this is for a total project or if it's a phase, and each one of us may feel differently about that in any given project. I sort of want to keep it in there just because because I'm curious. I think that's part of my gauge in an overall project score is whether or not they're close to the finish line, whether or not this is phase 1 of 3 and we're going to see them again. I mean, and each one is different. So I guess my vote is, I think what the second one is just maybe monkeying with the verbiage a little bit to see if we can't define that a little clearer, and then everybody can score their own way for each project.
Yeah, I agree on that one. I see some other hands up. We'll roll into the third section real quick, which is phase. And I'm going to throw my hat into on this one. I like to know if there's any other funding sources pending, because based on that phase, because if we're throwing money at something that's not going to fund the entire RFP, I want to know if they have that fund secured, or if we're throwing funds in there to be the first in line, or if that's going to help. And I think they need to explain that in their RFP and in the questionnaire. So third option is by phase. If we want to specify, change the verbiage, requires a one-time only infusion from the Affordable Housing Fund for this phase. All those, raise your hand. Want to see that one? Okay, Matt, Heather, Ian.
And I'll vote on that one too then.
Okay, Allison's 4. Okay. Oh, and Joanna, 9, 5. So I think it would simplify things if we eliminated it altogether, but I'm a nosy kind of guy and I want to know what's going on. So Rachel, would you mind next meeting, whenever you have time next year, change the verbiage just to specify for project? And I think that'll eliminate some of the interpretation issues that we have moving forward, and hopefully remedy this moving forward, at least for another year or so.
Matt, did you mean to say phase? You said project.
I did mean to say phase. Thank you.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
And we're kind of behind a little bit, but we need to roll into the loan versus grant process.
All right, I'm going to share my screen again. So we attempted to take the feedback you gave us on our last meeting's discussion on loan versus grant and incorporate it into our RFP process. And it'll also be incorporated into our training process. So primarily that means, like, at the very beginning of the projects that you will see before you, we're going to ask them to specify their loan terms on the main summary page. You guys also requested that they include the number of units or beds and the number of persons to be served. So I included that on the project summary form. You also asked to see the funds leveraged. So I included that on the summary form so that it's right there, the first thing you see when you're looking and evaluating a project. The budget also includes those leveraged funds, but I specified that language so that you could see it very clearly in the budget as well. So those loan versus grant terms should be provided on the summary form. And if they are asking for something different, then I have also asked them in the table of contents to provide an explanation of their undue hardship or preclusion of successful implementation to request loan terms different than what we have provided in the RFP. So that's all that we adjusted, and I wanted to make sure that that was enough for you all.
So it looks like you've given them a formal place to request something other than what the loan committee has put forth as a template. Thank you. Anybody have any notes on that, Kathy?
Yeah, that was very helpful about the loans, but I have a question regarding the other language about units or beds. Only because I guess the government assumes a certain number of people living in certain size units. And I'm not sure if that's what you were, when you said beds, if it's just for like homeless shelter
Yeah, just
beds
for
or,
shelters. Yeah,
okay.
just for
Yeah,
shelters.
because I just want to make sure people filling it out don't get confused in that, you know, they're doing a 3-bedroom apartment. Do they have to write there's 5 beds or, you know, that kind of thing?
Right.
Okay.
I think these are great improvements, Rachel. Thank you.
Yeah, I think they're awesome. All right, Ian, I see your hand up.
Yeah, my comment is that I'm strongly in favor. I think this is lovely. Thank you.
Cool. Let's
All
roll
right, so
into.
I will just make those adjustments to the RFP regarding the one-time use of funds, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Appreciate it. I know I can be high maintenance. Assessment of fair housing overview. And it looks like
All right,
Rachel.
I need to share my screen again. Be
There you go.
patient with me. Okay, so can everyone see the City of Bend 2022 assessment of fair housing? Just making sure, because I don't see what you see.
Yep, I can see it.
So we are getting started on our assessment of fair housing. There were some crazy changes in previous presidential administrations. This used to exist under the Obama administration, and then Trump put a stop to it. And we anticipate that Biden is going to bring it back. So we want to be prepared and have all the things that previously existed in place in the next year. And so that will require us to kind of dig in, look at our data, organize some focus groups, organize some stakeholder meetings, and gather kind of what people feel about their housing choice and housing options in the City of Bend, their access to opportunity, in addition to any fair housing complications that they've experienced. So move to the next slide. This is what the next year looks like for me. And I want you all to be a part of it. So right now we are gathering that data. We're going to update our citizen participation plan to include this fair housing assessment process. And so I will be getting you drafts of what that looks like here soon and probably voting on that in the next month. We want to identify our data sources, begin surveys, schedule those stakeholder meetings, and schedule those focus meetings or focus group meetings with community members at the low and moderate income level. June through July, we'll be finalizing the community participation process, having those meetings, getting the draft of the assessment started, and outlining kind of the analysis. And August through September, we'll be drafting the fair housing analysis, identifying factors that lead to unfair housing practices, and then kind of getting those initial conclusions in the fall, prioritizing the contributing factors to fair housing denial or negative impacts of housing or civil rights compliance. In November, we'll add those recommendations and kind of wrap up the draft with metrics, milestones, and timeframes for achieving goals. And then hopefully our draft will be completed by the end of this year, and then we'll put it through the public review process and it'll go before council and all of you for public hearings. However, I would love if any of you are willing to lead a focus group, or if as I prepare drafts, the committee would be interested in reviewing them. We could put it in some type of SharePoint document for all of you to see and provide comments and give us feedback. And then we will definitely be, bringing, as the draft gets more final, these to our AHAC meetings for discussion and review and public comment. Does anyone have questions for me?
Thank you for that. Ian, looks like you have a question. Go for it.
Thank you, Rachel. Can you describe, you asked for help in a couple of ways, and obviously that's sort of what this committee does. Can you describe what kind of time commitment that would look like in general terms, knowing that those are going to vary from item to item? And yeah, I'll stop with that. Thank you.
Since you've been fortunate enough for me to tee you up for some things, we do the work. If you're going to lead the group, we're going to help you prepare the questions and hope you bring your own questions to the table if you wanted to lead such a focus group or a stakeholder meeting group. Similarly, we're going to have you all teed up and prepared if you wanted to present the affordable or the fair housing assessment to council. We want this to be your project, and we as staff are here to help you implement it. It is a federal requirement for us to get our CDBG funding, but it is also real work that looks at what the city has done and makes efforts to improve access to fair housing in our community.
This may be a bit of a silly question. Are there studies that already exist on that?
Studies that already exist?
Yeah, maybe done by other nonprofit organizations where they're looking at fair housing and maybe have some numbers. I mean,
I wish.
Maybe the Fair Housing Council.
We'll certainly be working with Fair Housing Council of Oregon to make sure that they're giving us, their thoughts and insight and best practices to make sure that we do a good assessment for our community.
Then, if it's okay if I interject, Rachel, there is a really good synergy opportunity coming up in that council has identified as one of their goals an equity mapping project. And so we are working very closely with OPM, our Office of Performance Management. You all have met Jesse and Colleen looking at all sorts of things before, and our growth management department. And so the idea is that this equity map, when it's completed, my understanding is we're also going to be working on it with other public entities, which is fantastic. So that will be a resource really for the whole community and how we're making decisions. When the Obama administration created this rule, they provided a ton of data and maps for us. And really, one of the key differences between this report and the AI analysis of impediments to fair housing is the timeframes. So the AFH rule, Assessment of Fair Housing, has us look decade by decade over time at patterns and trends in the community, which is a pretty cool thing I kind of geek out on this, even though it's a lot of work. And so that's one of the big changes that when the rule went away during the Trump administration, those maps and data were pulled down. So we don't know if those are going to be available again by the time that this is kind of due for us, but we do know that the rule is coming back. And so we're trying to be as prepared as possible. The good news is that the city has some really great efforts underway that will contribute to this and that we will work, hand in hand. So that's really the synergy that's out there in case that helps with your question.
We're also waiting for that census data. So we'll probably be putting together like a really rough draft with like 2020 kind of the estimate data that exists, but we won't have that census data until August. And we're hoping to kind of have most of what we need completed by then. So there'll be some like maybe quick plug and play if that census data is really contrary to those estimates.
Muted.
Heather and Priscilla, I don't know who was first, but with hands.
I don't know who had a question first, Heather or
Yeah,
Priscilla, but
Priscilla, I don't know if I keep hitting mute on accident. I see your hand up.
I just wanted to say I'm very much in support of needs assessments. For the state of Oregon, Providence, and all health systems do one every 4 years around health. They're incredibly informative. They become fundamental documents used by multiple different agencies. They are incredibly valuable to the public. They make a positive statement about what our intent is, and they're very useful and informative. So, I think these are really valuable beyond what we can anticipate right now. So I am very supportive of this, and thank you for you guys being far-seeing on this.
Absolutely. Heather.
Just a couple of clarifying questions. So the rule that was maybe rolled back with the previous administration, was this an annual requirement to do this assessment? What was the periodicity for it?
We have a requirement that has been in place for quite a while. So that I'll say the underlying law that created the need for cities to affirmatively further fair housing came out of the Civil Rights Act of 1968, which a section of that is called the Fair Housing Act. And so that is where the phrase affirmatively further fair housing comes from. However, what administrations in power have done over the years has varied widely. And so historically, it's been really every 5 years. What Obama intended to do, in my understanding, was kind of put teeth behind it. So in theory, under the sort of Obama era rule, cities could actually lose funding by not performing and not sort of making progress towards fair housing goals. That's what was rolled back by Trump. We still have the duty to affirmatively further fair housing, but what that means is really kind of what's at issue. So we're on an every 5-year cycle with this one, and this will lead into our consolidated plan. So that's part of why, although we won't have the census data when we would love to, why we're pushing this timeline is because after we get this one approved, then Rachel gets to spend another year writing the con plan and kind of going through a similar process. So the idea is that this kind of feeds some of the goals and outcomes in the con plan, and the public engagement we do now will help really sort of set the tone and create the framework for how we proceed with the con plan. You all, of course, will be involved the entire time on both of those, but just so you know, that's why we're at this time frame. It's also not something that we have to have it on file. HUD needs to be able to access it. We send it to them, et cetera, but it hasn't really been something that's like approved in any way. We get suggestions and recommendations and things like that. The AFH, the new version, if that is to come back, we'll have a formal approval process that goes up through DC. We know from the first round, because the rule was in place for about a year, I want to say, initially only about 50% of plans were approved by the government. And so it is a beefy document and challenge. The instructions alone are over 100 pages. So that's why we want to be sure that we are ready when this rule comes back and aren't caught off guard. And that's kind of why we're going big, even though we're not technically required today to go through this full process. We know it's coming and we don't want to be out of compliance when it does. So.
Thank you for that clarification. And then my second question is, Rachel, and I think you said this, but what is the timeline for going to City Council with the draft assessment?
we want to have a draft by December 31st. And so we would have like the public comment period, and it probably could go to council at the same time that we introduce our affordable housing fund or our CDBG funds.
Well, I mean, for myself, I'm happy to help. I mean, as we get into different phases of this work, I know it'd be helpful to me for some individual outreach or as a group outreach to say, hey, this is what we've got coming up, whether it be focus groups or other, commitments, and then ask for volunteers at that point so we can participate as we can.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Priscilla, your hand's up still. It is. Oh, okay. Kathy, I see you again.
Yeah, thank you. I understand you're going to get a third person in your department, Lynn. Is that right? Are you getting someone else in there? Because I see this is just going to be so much work for Rachel, and I'm just concerned for your overall workload. Can you let us know if that's happening and an update on that? Rachel, you're a doll to do all this work. I'm completely overextended on other committees. I'm not going to volunteer on this one, but thank you for all that you're doing on that.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said about Rachel's workload and all of her great attributes. Yes, we are hiring. And so I'm super excited to tell you all this. We have over 20 applications that came in. The vast majority are highly qualified for the position. And so we're sort of starting to weed through those, doing initial interviews sometime hopefully in the next couple of weeks, with the idea of once Heather and Barb get the budget passed, then we will be able to make an offer to somebody, which will be, mid-June at the earliest. So on that process right now, we do intend to deploy that new person to back Rachel up with some outreach and sort of some of this work. I think that'll be a great sort of introduction to the affordable housing program and the community as well. So yeah, good news. It is a really big deal. You're right. I mean, it is a ton of capacity and time that's taken up. And I am so thankful that Rachel loves this work, so that she is great at doing it.
Ian?
Thank you. In response to Rachel's comment about teeing committee members up, I have been lucky enough to work with Rachel on a couple of these, and I will say she and Lynn in other occasions have been incredibly flexible to me in terms of how much time I was able to put into the exercise, whatever it was, and making sure I have what I needed. I very much appreciate their help, and they've been very flexible. Just for other folks that may be thinking about volunteering, I strongly recommend it. I have a much deeper understanding of what we do as a committee, having been out a little bit more and in front of stakeholder groups. So sometimes I've had a lot of time, sometimes I've had almost none, and they made me look pretty competent every time. So thank you, and that's somewhat surprising.
This is true, and I definitely second that. Joanna?
I just want to say that I'm potentially interested in being involved in helping out after knowing more of what it would look like, especially if you can make me look competent.
Lynn and Rachel, I'm wondering if you can send out maybe later on an email blast to everybody with this outline, and then potentially some rough dates or even a questionnaire as to when people would be available for this, and they can sign up as needed.
Yeah, we can definitely do that.
Cool.
And really, people, it doesn't take much to make you guys look competent. We just sort of like hand you some notes and you take it out. I mean, come on. We're lucky to have you.
Lynn, staff report.
All right, so a little bit different on this staff report. I have Pauline Hardy here with me as well. So wanted to start with a discussion of House Bill 2001. This is our missing middle bill, statewide implementation. Bend has been working for a long time on allowing missing middle housing. So you all will remember that this committee, some of you, I think maybe we've had full turnover since then, but recommended in 2015 the cottage code for Bend, and that we passed that a long time ago, and since then have been kind of slowly moving towards full compliance, even before any of us knew what House Bill 2001 was. So as recently as last biennium, council set a goal to include fourplexes in our standard residential zone, which we have been working towards. We kind of put that on hold once 2001 came to be, to make sure that we didn't do the work and have to go back and do it again as soon as the bill passed. But here we are. So we are fortunate to have Kathy Austin, having sat on a stakeholder committee that's been meeting for at least a year to talk through some of these missing middle housing types and sort of how we can effectively get them into Bend neighborhoods. And so Kathy's going to supplement or correct whatever I say, as will Pauline. as we proceed, but wanted to really sort of let you all know a couple of really key considerations. And the reason for that is that there will be a joint work session at Planning Commission on June 14th. So that is coming right up. I would encourage this group to watch that via YouTube if you're up for it. Doesn't have to be right at the time. It should be posted there, permanently, I would assume, at least for the term that folks would be interested in looking at it. And each of the committees will have the chance to engage on the topic and talk about sort of what our highest needs are and how this should be done most effectively. So that's coming up. Kathy, I think that we have you slated to attend that, but I can't remember if I sent it to you and Ian both, so we can talk about that as time goes on. And then what is potentially more important is that depending on how that goes and what changes may need to be made, there will be a hearing at Planning Commission that may happen just before our next AHAC meeting. So wanted to make sure that you all were in the know and could help sort of guide Kathy and or Ian, whoever represents this group at Planning Commission, to make sure that everybody's on the same page and we can proceed. What I'm not going to do is take you through every code change in House Bill 2001. I'm going to pull out just a couple of really key things that I think you need to know. And then Pauline and Kathy can jump in as we go if there are any other pieces. So what I'd love to do is Matt, Rachel, whoever, as I share my screen, can you please keep an eye for hands and questions so that as I go on, I'm not missing anybody. So can you all see my screen right now? Okay.
Yes.
Great. So first thing to know is that House Bill 2001 differentiates duplexes from all other missing middle housing types. Duplexes now equal a single unit or single family home under the law in Oregon. Anywhere you can put a single family home, you can put a duplex once everybody adopts these rules. Now, this is only for larger cities. If you're under 10,000, you can come into voluntary compliance, but you're not required to do all the same things that a city of Bend size is. So I'm really focused in this one on Bend. There will be different requirements or different processes for smaller cities in the region. So for us, as soon as this rule is passed, anywhere you can put a single family home, also you can put a duplex. Okay. And so the language down here is straight out of the bill. Each city shall allow, right? So that's pretty clear. There's a very different framework for other middle housing types, and there's a lot of words on this page, but you can see local governments may regulate siting and design of these other unit types. However, the important part here is that the regulations do not individually or cumulatively discourage development of all missing housing types permitted in the area through unreasonable cost and delay. So unreasonable cost and delay is the phrase I want you all to remember here. Do we know exactly what that means? No. However, you all are probably the ones best suited to determine what unreasonable cost and delay is in the development, and that's why I want you to understand this. So there are three options to come into compliance with each of the sections of House Bill 2001. The first is there was a model code created at the state level. Pauline sat on that technical advisory committee and helped sort of influence the implementability of this policy. We can adopt by section, each section of the model code as we so choose. That's one option. The other one is OARs, Oregon Administrative Rules, and this is really sort of minimum compliance. So we can choose, in some cases, there's a slight difference, and I'm going to show you what this looks like on the next slide, between what the OARs say for minimum compliance and what the model code says. So that's a choice that we can make, and the stakeholder committee did section by section through each of the requirements. The alternative path is what's described kind of with the letters below. Remember, we are trying to prove that there is no unreasonable cost or delay if we want to take an alternative path. That's our bar. As you all can imagine, the number one topic for what is or isn't unreasonable cost or delay, or what should we go beyond model code or OARs for, is parking, right? No surprise to anybody on this crew. Lots and lots of discussion about parking and what parking means, and very strong feelings on all sides, I'll say. So this is the issue that I really wanted to bring to your all attention. We can toggle back and forth between slides, and this language I can send out afterwards if folks are interested, but I'm going to show you what it looks like in one example here. So this is an example of quadplexes or fourplexes. The bill calls them quadplexes. And sorry for the formatting, it's a little weird. I gave up arguing with Microsoft, but more or less the type of unit quadplexes on the left, and parking is what we're talking about. The Bend Development Code is that first column, BDC for RM and RH. That's what we have in place right now. In this case, as you can see, it does not match with either the OARs or the model code, which is OARs are that minimum compliance, that middle column, and then the model code is the third column. I know this is challenging to read, but ultimately what we decided to do, what the group decided to do, was for model code to go with 2 off-street spaces, parking spaces per quadplex in alignment with the model code. I understand that there may be an effort to try to convince council to take an alternative path, in which case we, City of Bend, would have to prove that adding more parking spaces to a quad development would not cause unreasonable cost, additional cost or delay over developing them without those 2 spaces, if that makes sense. I have strong feelings about this, like all of you probably do, if I've done a good enough job explaining it. And I think Pauline and I have been working really hard with the stakeholder group to try to talk through, and we've had state staff as well from DLCD participating in a lot of our stakeholder meetings. It's hard for me to imagine that we could prove that parking would not be an unreasonable cost or delay under this sort of alternative siting. And it takes a very, as you saw in this last slide, all of these little bullets down at the bottom, those are the things that you have to look at in order to make that alternative qualification. I am wide open. I'm guessing Pauline is too. If you all could see a path and feel like it's really important to push for more off-street parking for quads or other uses, my suspicion is that that path doesn't exist. And I think what's most important about that, in my perception, is that because it's discretionary, that means that we are not in any sort of safe harbor if we choose to go forth and try to prove that. That opens us up potentially, and maybe it would never happen, but potentially to liability on whether or not it really does, cause unreasonable cost or delay. So this is the piece that I thought you all really should understand about the consideration. Parking is one of the siting and design features that we looked through and tried to determine. There were things like height and design elements, et cetera, that we also evaluated through the process, but just wanted to really call this one out because of course, parking is always a big topic when we're talking about the code and about development. So I wanted to pause here for just a sec. I can go back to that next slide if that's of interest and just see if Pauline or Kathy wanted to add anything to what I just said thus far.
Oh, I'd just like to add that we have a very large stakeholder group, and we have people representing every stakeholder. I mean, we have several people from the Neighborhood Leadership Alliance, and then we have builders, small developers, architects, providers, you name it. And even though the Neighborhood Alliance people keep pushing for more parking, they're in the vast minority. That the rest of the group has been, let's just stick with the model code or the OARs, depending on what works best. And I would agree completely with what Lynn says. There's just no way that we could say, oh, we want to require more parking, but it's not going to cost any more. It's a futile effort. And the other point is that, this new effort is designed to get the city out of the way from creativity, from developers and architects coming forward with new forms of housing. Whether or not it's going to be financially feasible is a big question in my mind. I think we're going to see if any of these kind of limited amount of parking happens, it might be in the central core area. It's not going to suddenly appear in everybody's neighborhood. And I'm afraid that some in the neighborhood groups fear the absolute worst possible scenario in every circumstance. They're convinced, you know, that the world is going to come to an end. And that's probably not very nice of me to say, but that is essentially the vibe that they give off by the comments that they make. But I will say we've worked over a year, maybe a year and a half, almost 2 years on this. And Pauline has been incredibly patient and very fair in listening to everybody. And when we needed to, we had votes on everything. And we went through line by line by line from the document. But I think, Pauline, you're going to send a link probably in the chat to the code that it's now up on the city's website. I know you did that at noon at our meeting with the AIA, and then everybody can look and see.
Kathy, you should have that. Everyone should have that code. I sent it out sometime between when we initially sent the meeting materials and today. So hopefully
I did get it. I didn't know if everybody on this committee got it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. And then if folks don't see that and are interested, please let me know. But you made me think of two other things that may or may not be important to bring up. I'm just going to do it. One is these are minimum parking requirements. There is no prohibition against putting in more parking if folks choose, right? That's always an option. We do have maximums in some places in town, but I don't think we created any for this this process. Second thing is that this bill did discuss CC&Rs, and it was decided by the legislature that future creation of CC&Rs would be affected by this bill, right? So you can no longer prohibit these missing middle types in new subdivisions that are being created. However, they specifically did not remove CC&Rs from existing development that were created by more or less by the time of this bill signing. So anyone who has CC&Rs requiring something different, you know, that will continue to be in existence in those subdivisions. So I did want to point that out as well, that you know, there are a lot of CC&Rs that's private right of action. The city does not get involved in that, but did want to point out that that's out there and is kind of another, I don't know how to describe it, but it affects the bill and sort of how this bill will affect individual neighborhoods. Does that make, hopefully I'm making sense. Pauline, did you want to add anything or?
No, I think you captured it really well. You know, even this week with this, we have that new small dwelling unit developments where you can do small homes on small lots, and a developer, actually it's becoming quite popular. We have several applications in for those. And one of them was for a creation of 3 lots, and the neighbors are upset because there's no parking really in the neighborhood because there's no on-street parking and it only requires 1 per unit. And so the developer came in, now he's putting 3 on each lot. So instead of the 3 that were required, he's going to put in 9. So I think, again, as Lynn said, these are minimum parking requirements. A developer can always put in more parking if they want to. And another thing, just to help explain the siting and design section, you know, yes, we have committee members that are interested in possibly using this section for parking, but what it's really geared for is in Portland, they just adopted the residential infill project this past year. And they have a new standard called, I think it's the visibility standard. So if you provide the first floor units with some standards that make them more accessible, they get an increased FAR or some incentives. Well, that standard is no longer allowed in the administrative rules or the model code because it is, well, could be considered unreasonable cost. But when you go through this exercise here, the siting and design standards, you can clearly point out to F that the cost imposed by the proposed standards is actually providing a public benefit. So that's what this really was set up to do, is to think outside the box in case, you know, the model code or the OARs don't address everything, which they just can't. Then there's this additional process. I don't strongly think that this was geared to require more or allow more parking, but some feel the argument can be made. And another thing is, it doesn't really clearly say who reviews this. If staff were to go through this exercise, I believe it's just DLCD's staff of reading our findings and saying yay or nay to it. That's all I have.
So with that, I will just go to my last little slide because I really kind of like this little diagram. I pinched it off of, I think that this was down in California in the Palo Alto area when they were talking about comparable things. So a few little housing types here, Planning Commission work session on the 14th. Hearing July 12th or 26th. So there is a chance we'll have an AHAC meeting before the hearing, but there's a chance we won't. And then City Council, Pauline, I'm taking a wild guess that we're going in August, most likely. Okay, good, I got it right. So just wanted to give you all a sense. Please do, if you are up for it, tune into that hearing. You can join the Zoom through the agenda, just like any committee meeting, but even better, just to avoid any sort of sense of potential quorum, to watch it on YouTube as well. So I'm going to stop sharing. Any questions on that before we move on? I guess the other question is, is AHAC interested in the potential of submitting a letter for the hearing at Planning Commission when that time comes? I'm assuming you all are in favor of these continued housing options because you have promoted them up to this point, but that is an assumption, and wanted to certainly make sure that folks are on board. We can submit that letter at some point. We may have a chance to bring that back to this committee, but I just wanted to sort of open that up just in case it happens between now and our next meeting.
I'm hoping that the committee will be supportive. We've talked a lot about the fact that we're able to help housing that's subsidized. The goal of this effort is to provide alternatives that aren't subsidized but can address that missing middle housing, and the council has identified that as a severe need, and we've identified it as a severe need, and it has been incredibly vetted over a lengthy period of time from all the stakeholders. So I think it would be a good thing for our committee to weigh in on this. And it doesn't have to be a complicated letter, but I think it would be great if we could be supportive.
I'm all in agreement for that, showing our support. Getting out of the way is sometimes the best thing when it comes to providing housing for the community. And yeah, I'd be all in support. Anybody have any notes against that or want to make any comments?
Thank you. I think I saw enough nods to get us there. So we'll probably keep it pretty broad at this point. And then if folks want to have another discussion before the city council meeting, I think that's totally appropriate. Happy to do that. Just keep us in the loop on whether you want that. Okay. So we also have a Fair Housing Council training upcoming on May 18th from 5 to 7. You all should have received that flyer in your meeting packet. If you have not and want more info, or if you can help us, oh good, Rachel's doing it. Can help us distribute this information, get the word out, please do. We'd love to have a good turnout for this. Yeah, keep that in your, I guess, email box and try to help us get the word out for that. Rachel, did you want to say anything else on that before I move on?
No, I'm good.
Okay, can you, we didn't talk about this, so it's a little awkward, but can you do the Shepherd's House update? Or I can jump in and come back to you.
No. Shepherd's House had shut down their winter warming shelter. They fulfilled their grant obligation of what they applied for over last winter, and they were going to resume doing their winter shelter with the remaining funds and with the funds that we awarded in this upcoming winter. However, there's been some additional ESG funds for neighbor impact. They're going to open back up June 1st. So Shepherd's House will continue. We want to make sure that it is still your intention for any of those extra funds we get to go to Shepherd's House, regardless of how much funding we get, because we are continuing to get some significant program income. And we just want to make sure that the committee is committed to making sure that Shepherd's House continues to get that extra funding that we receive.
Memory serves me correct, we were pretty much short on their ask. And that's why we kind of wrote in the verbiage that any extra funding come in afterward for that. Does anybody have any comments or questions or thoughts on that?
I just want to make sure we revisit the notes because I think I remember us doing that exercise and I don't recall if there was any other prioritization that we added there. It wasn't just Shepherd's House.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm just wondering, are you bringing this up because they don't need the funds? I mean, is there a sense? No. Okay, good. Then I'm all for continuing to do that.
I don't see any hands up. Anybody else? Good update.
Thank you. Rachel, you want to talk about oh, actually, I'll start this one. So you all had asked for 90-day check-in with Related Northwest on property, securing that property on Mary Rose Place. Unfortunately, they were unable to convert that letter of intent into a PSA. At the very last minute, it sounds like the seller moved up the closing timeline about a year. Which is not possible when you're dealing with all the financing needed and timelines from the state to get that done. So they unfortunately had to let go of that parcel. I heard from somebody else that is now under contract with somebody else almost immediately. We'll see how that goes. They were incredibly disappointed to lose the opportunity to develop in Bend. I think they're eager to come back and give it another go, but that does pull that money back into the Affordable Housing Fund. And so because of that, the staff recommendation is actually to transfer, instead of having Housing Works have a bridge between both CDBG and Affordable Housing Fund, to have that money, all of the Affordable Housing Fund, go to Housing Works for this round, because they had asked for the grand total and we could split it however we so chose. That saves us an environmental review, which I always appreciate. And also means that we would potentially we would anticipate with that approval from you that we would be putting out another CDBG RFP in the very near future. And so by transferring, instead of having Housing Works sort of bridge the two funding sources, that would just mean that we only have to do one RFP instead of doing one for CDBG and one for Affordable Housing Fund. That's really the only sort of big difference within that. So wanted to just sort of float that by you, let you know that if folks give enough of a head nod, we will sort of move towards that, and also get a new CDBG RFP out very shortly to try to make sure that we hit our timeliness test next year, because that does leave some funding on the table. These funds aren't actually even available until July 1, these CDBG funds. So we're still a little bit ahead of schedule, but it does take a long time to get through that CDBG process. And so we want to make sure that we're starting as early as possible and setting ourselves up for success. Rachel, did I catch everything on that one? Okay.
Yeah, the RFP will look much like what you saw today. So I would, probably put that language regarding phase in. Just wanted to make sure everyone's comfortable with that too.
It was either that or eliminate it altogether. But yeah, if you could change it to phase, that'd be great. Kathy has her hand up.
Oh, sorry.
Kathy, you're muted.
I muted instead of unmuted, sorry. Do we know if the people that went into contract on Mary Rose Place are also an affordable housing developer?
They're not.
They're not. Darn it.
So.
Oh, what a shame.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ian?
I have a question for staff, but it can be at the end of the agenda.
Any concerns with the proposed plan of us sort of unofficially transferring that Affordable Housing Fund to Housing Works for the same amount that they were awarded already, just rather than split in one fell swoop. And then we'll stick the CDBG RFP back out again really shortly. If anybody has big concerns, now's your time. Okay, wanted to also a couple more quick updates. You all may have read that City of Bend was awarded $2.5 million for a navigation center. I'm really excited about this. We intend to do this in a 2-phase public process. So the first phase will be an RFI, request for information. This will really help the community, help us scope the RFP, future RFP appropriately, and make sure that we're really thinking about all the needs and are aware of all the opportunities that are out there in the community. So I am very hopeful that we'll get that RFI released in the next couple of weeks. We'll see. And so just know that that's out there. A response, which won't be graded at all, to that RFI will qualify somebody to apply for the eventual contract that'll be decided under the second phase, which is an RFP, if that makes sense. So RFI, we're getting information, we're speaking with folks, we're kind of, pulling all that together. If you submit something there, then when the RFP comes out shortly after that really has the defined scope and defined sort of sense of moving towards a contract, then you could also apply for that RFP. So that'll be that will be happening over the very near term. The goal here is that something is in operation in 2022. That's the deadlines that we have in the bill. So we do need to kind of keep hustling with this process, and just wanted to let you know that this is coming. And then council also had a request to evaluate a nonprofit property tax exemption for affordable housing that they agreed to, and asked you all to start working through that. So I just wanted you to know that that was out there too. It's one of our first sort of new assignments from this council. We'll have more information about goals after the budget gets passed and we know sort of what exactly we're working with, timelines, et cetera. But know that there's more coming on that. And in the meantime, you'll hear more about the nonprofit property tax exemption in the near future at AHAC meetings. The idea is that you all, as council sort of technical advisory committee, will work through that and then bring back a recommendation one way or another to them. And then Rachel, you want to talk about timeliness?
So I'll be giving a timeliness update towards the end of our program year. However, we just had our timeliness test and we passed. So just want to give you all a pat on the back. However, we do have a big chunk of funding that we also need to get spent in this next year. So just keep that in mind as we go through the next RFP process with those CDBG funds. And then Lynn, you also had that slide. I just wanted to see if you wanted me to share that about how we've spent money the last 4 years.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I was thinking that we would do that with the scoring criteria discussion, but yes, are you up for sharing that really quick, and I'll talk through it really quick? Okay. So as we talked about scoring criteria, you all had asked last time to see a breakdown of how we've spent money over the past few years. And so Rachel's going to show you a little graphic to represent that. What we decided to do was pull the Affordable Housing Fund only for this exercise, in part because services kind of just isn't a very easy one-to-one comparison, I guess. And then I don't know what happened. Oh, there it is. Okay. So what you're looking at here is most recent year on the left. That green represents shelter funding. These are dollars. The yellow represents rental and the orange represents ownership. So you can see there's been some pretty good sized changes over the years. I think our recommendation based on what you all had talked about last time was to create in the Affordable Housing Fund a soft set aside at some level for homeownership. We are not recommending that at this time for CDBG, and the reason for that is really just timeliness and the fact that we have, a handful of really solid ownership developers of affordable housing in town. Both of them have had some delays over the last year due to COVID and other things. And so because CDBG works really well for things like down payment assistance, we're not too worried that that's going to get whittled away by other projects. It tends to go a lot towards homeownership. But for Affordable Housing Fund, we wanted to present the idea of a recommendation to do some sort of soft set aside of 10%, 20%, whatever that is, for homeownership. If there are not applicants that meet you all's minimum criteria, that money could then go towards rental or shelter or other things. But did want to sort of put that out there as a possibility for you all to talk about. Because we're over time, I am totally happy to bring this back and we can talk about it in July if that makes the most sense, because I know folks have other things going on beyond just committee volunteer work, but did want to sort of show you this breakdown initially.
Definitely an interesting graph, and it kind of shows a little bit more of what we discussed last time. But yeah, I'd be all for discussing it when we have a little bit more time, I'm sure. A 10% allotment does seem pretty adequate, and we always have some sort of ask. Anybody else want to chime in? Good.
So maybe, Matt, if it's okay, folks can think about what that percentage might be and what makes sense to you all, so that when we bring back hopefully some language next time, that you all can sort of just have thought about that. Yeah.
Awesome. Will you do me a favor and just email that graph out to everybody so that we can kind of see what, maybe come up with our own little calculations as to what the median and run is and all that, in case we want to geek out on the numbers. Thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. So I think that's it for staff, unless Rachel, did I forget anything? Okay, I think that's it for us. Ian?
I was wondering, and yes, I know we're at time, potentially it's on the agenda for the next meeting, but I'd like to have a discussion from staff of the impact of the federal redefinition of MSAs and how that might impact long-term funding in the city of Bend, because that ending census data could change a lot of things.
I can give the very brief summary, which is that it won't have an effect on CDBG at all. We are grandfathered in regardless of where the census lands population-wise. It may have an impact on transportation funding. So our council chose to write a comment as part of that rulemaking process, basically saying we don't want to lose transportation funding. I will find out a little more detail on that because that's not the part I've been following as well. But the good news is CDBG is safe, and even if we come in under 100,000 with the new census data, we'll be grandfathered in for that program. So I'll find out some more on transportation, and yeah, that's a great suggestion to bring that back. So.
Thank you, everyone. And it looks like with that,